Hi, I am live, which is very exciting. Um, Excellent. Hi, I'm live, which is very exciting. Do you know if you're able to hear me, Shadi? Give me a shout. Otherwise, I feel like we're good, and I'm really excited to make this happen. Mute it. About 20 seconds till take off, which is exciting, super exciting. Comments. Comment. My version not set. I'm on. Someone's looking at this. Current viewers, 1. Can you hear me? Let me know if you can hear me. Hope you can. I'm also going to actually play some computer sound and let me know if that actually worked, please. Can you hear? Is this okay? Well, hopefully it will be, because here we are. Hello, everybody. My name is Nicola Chang. I'm a sound designer and composer, and welcome to KHTOnline Live. This is my second time doing this, so I'm going to give you a brief introduction about myself. And I'm going to wait until about 1:05 till we start. Briefly, my name is Nicola Chang. I'm a sound designer and a composer. And I started as a musician. I grew up playing percussion and piano. And then I did a BA in economics and international relations because I did it. And then I moved to London in 2014 in hopes of pursuing a career in music. I started off as a performer, actually. So I performed in Stomp, and then I also did a bit of MDing, for example, for Six. And then, because I loved writing music, I thought sound design for theatre might be interesting, and did a couple of sound design gigs. The first one being in hello, I can be heard. That's great. And the Lion Unicorn at Kentish Town. And then that's kind of snowballed, and then now I'm here. I love my job. It's such a fascinating thing to try your best at making something cohesive to wrap around a play, and this is what I'd love to talk about today. So yeah, and also if you've got any questions, please just feel free to pop them in the chat, or you can email me afterwards, and I'll let everybody know my email address at the very end. Some things I'm going to talk about, you might want to have a writing utensil, or you might want to type it down. I'm going to talk about some free resources to make sound effects or to source sound effects, and also some things to think about, so that might be useful. Yeah. It's going to give a little time for you to come in. I'll talk about my day-to-day work life at the moment in COVID time as a sound designer. So at the moment, it's a lot of ads and jingles. My next task is to do a jingle for a timber company, and my prompt is to make it very blokey, which has been okay, I suppose. I'm trying to find all my locally friends to make the voiceover, but it will work. So it's been a lot of these things, which has been also quite fun because it's another way of extrapolating and figuring out how people listen to music, how people get attracted to things. And I've been doing a lot of audio dramas and audio plays, which by itself is also another thing to get into, getting more into binaural sound, which has also been quite a journey. Binaural sound is basically if you wear headphones for binaural sound recordings, you end up almost hearing things exactly as they are spatially in a three-dimensional space. And this technology has been around for a while, but recently, because I think we are all, due to lockdown, a lot of people have turned towards the technology as a vehicle for plays, and you listen to binaural stuff, it's absolutely fascinating and really, really intimate, which has been really fun, I think, and trying to get deeper into it at some point or the other. Yeah, so that is my COVID day-to-day life at the moment, doing jingles. But then, as a sound designer, day-to-day life is usually split between rehearsals and meetings, and then also making music and making content, which is making the stuff that underscores the plays, underscores the work that I'm a part of. Okay, I'm gonna give it another, I think, 10 seconds, and then I'm just gonna dive right in. And as always, feel free to put any questions, any comments in the chat, and I look forward to talking a bit more about what I'm passionate about and what I deeply love, which is my job. And so yeah, how do you approach sound design for plays? As a musician, I used to spend a lot of time thinking about the quality of the content. I used to spend so much time thinking about whether the chords were right, without actually thinking about whether it worked for the play itself. I think dramaturgy is something that I'm also slowly still learning. And this is therefore a short session for things that worked for me. And if you also have a script in your hand, or if you are a theatre maker and you want to try some of these out, please do. I'm going to list some free resources. But and that I might just type them actually in the comments so that you can have a record of it, of some free browser-based software where you can make music and create sound effects for yourself. So yeah, I think in my experience, when I think about sound design, when I get attached to a project, here are the 7 things I think about. Unfortunately, there's 7. First thing that's important is think about the setting of the piece. So where is it set, and the logic of the sound effects that go underneath it. If it's quite naturalistic, at the soundscape at night should be maybe more crickets than in the daytime when there should be more birds. So think about the logic of the setting. Second thing I think about is the mood and the emotion. Sound tends to be quite good at letting us know, aside from text and acting, what the internal world of a character is, or even the external mood of a scene is. And so that's worth thinking about. And that's a question I usually ask is, so what are we feeling? What is the character feeling at the moment? Third thing I think about is also amplification. So, and the sound source. So where does the sound come from? If you're able to locate sound on a place on the stage, what effect does that create? If you're able to mic some of your performers and put microphones on them, what effect does that create, and whose voice becomes louder in the piece? So that's also worth thinking about. I think about the fourth thing I think about is diegetic and non-diegetic sound. If I get this academese correct, diegetic sound is sound that characters can hear in the piece, and non-diegetic sound is sound that characters cannot hear in the piece and therefore don't belong in their world. And there can be things that flow between diegetic and non-diegetic sound. So for example, you have a piece of scene change music that started during a blackout and then faded into a record player on stage, and the character comes on stage and turns it off, and that's a non-diegetic sound flowing into a diegetic sound. And what effect does that create? Whose world does that belong to? I think about my sound palette. That's a big thing. A sound palette, and the themes and the influences that inform that. Themes, doing more with less tends to work quite well, I find, at least for me. And so, for example, if you've got one sound effect or one song or one theme, a few notes, 4 notes, dun 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 dun. What do you do with these 4 notes, and how do you transform them throughout the piece? And how do we as audiences latch meaning onto them? Sound palette is sort of like a Pinterest board, but for sounds. And sound palettes could be metallic, for example, or they could be informed by jazz. They could be electronic. They could be almost like game blitz and blops. But it's sort of the boundaries that you're going to operate within. It's not like design language, you see. And then when you operate out of those boundaries, what kind of effect does that create? I think about story and memory. Sound is good at telling story, adding a dimension of story and memory to a piece. And what I mean by that, so for example, if I think when approaching this element of sound design, I think about what is there in this piece that other design elements aren't doing, or what the script isn't doing. So if there's a character that's, for example, running away, we as audiences members already know that their action is going on, and therefore by adding action drums or deep pulses and rhythms, it's supporting what's going on, and would work and may work. But if you add, for example, the sound of a lullaby that character used to hear when they were at home, or a song that they used to associate with a character that they love, and then on their running away, now you're adding a dimension of sound and memory for us, and you giving us insight into the internal emotional world of a character rather than supporting what's on stage, if that makes any sense. So you're not supporting action, you're actually adding a dimension of story and memory. And sound, as well as projection, also does this really well, is that you add the element of the outside world in. For example, if this play deals with workers' rights, and then, as an example, if you put in recordings of recent workers' rights and demonstrations, It adds also, it contextualizes the play within a different setting, but also expands the world of the play and makes it more relevant to us as audience members, and doesn't just constrict it strictly onto the stage. I also think about the seventh thing is sound as a character. What I mean by that, there, for example, it's things for people on stage to react to. I once did a show called Finishing the Picture, where instead of having Marilyn Monroe on stage, we had a saxophone that reacted to all the other characters speaking to Marilyn Monroe. The saxophone belonged to the sound world of the piece because it was set in America in the 1950s, and we were at all the pre-show music and scene change tracks with cool jazz, and I'll show you that in a bit. It's about having different shapes and contours of saxophone melodies that mimicked almost human speech, that allowed us to have a lot more flexibility and also have fun and play around with using sound to tell story and sound as a character. So here we go. I get a script and then I ask questions and I think about those 7 elements, which I'll type again. All good. I'm going to draw my notes up. Here. Cool. Rainbow Wheel of Doom. So when I first read a script, I don't usually think about sound just yet. I ask myself, and I ask the director and ask everybody in the team, what is this script about, and what is the relationship between all our characters? What causes tension? Where are the moments of conflict, and are there points of resolution? And what is the structure? And that not going beyond a 3-act play, but what is the structure? Are there any patterns of ways that the action on stage is structured? Where and when, location. What are the emotional and tonal shifts, and can sound play against or play with it? Is there a pervading emotion that builds, and is there an emotional journey? And do we like our characters, and also do they have backstories to help us empathize with them? Which is why being in rehearsal as a sound designer is really, really useful and really helpful, because I find out motivations of characters, and then how can I use an element of sound to add and support that. Also, a good question to ask is, how might characters hear and interpret sounds based on their experiences? So if a character, for example, for a show called Little Baby Jesus, when the characters on stage were talking about playground fights in their childhood, a lot of the sound effects tend to be bigger and more fantastical, because the idea is that when you're a kid, when you're a child, everything is just bigger. And so we used a lot of game sounds from arcade games for a playground fight, and that add an element of playfulness and fun, and you're looking through memory, or almost like a different kind of lens. So do think about when how characters on stage are interpreting sounds, and how audiences on stage interpret sounds. And there's something really fun as well if you have the same sound. For sake of argument, let's say someone kicking a football, that clack sound. If a footballer, thinks of it as a massive swing, a massive jubilant sound, whereas we as audience members just go, oh, someone's kicking a football around. And that tells us as well another dimension and element to the story. I read the script, I try to enjoy it as a reader, and then I also want to know, what are we walking away with? Not all scripts I think not all shows have to tell a story, but I think most of the creative team need to be united in what the audience is walking away with. And then I put myself in the audience's shoes, and then I will think about how sound can fill in the gaps and help with storytelling. And also, what can sound do that other things, such as the text, the action, the acting, the set, and lighting projection cannot do? Yeah. And so we also ask about, what is the internal world of our characters? And sometimes some directors ask actors to prepare playlists for different moods, and that's really helpful, because what does this character listen to when they go for a walk, and what does this character listen to when they're sad or when they're happy? And that says a lot about their happy place and the palette for them as well. And we also look at what I also look for, and we should think about naturalistic sound effects in the script and be loyal to them, but also think about if there are other ways of doing them, and what kind of function, what do they serve functionally to, and if we can replace them by other ways. I've seen really amazing productions where stage directions of sounds were read aloud by an actor, and that also had an amazing effect as well. And when you think about the sound effects, naturalistic sound effects in a script, and don't forget the time and setting of the piece. So a 1950s phone ring is very different from a 1990s phone ring. just as a city road during the day is very different from a city road at night, and an American police siren is very different from a British police siren. Yeah. Also think about the purpose of sound effects. Are they there to punctuate and interrupt the scene? Are they there to escalate tension? Why is there a phone ringing in the middle of an argument? Like, what does that actually serve? So then you can alter the sound of the phone ringing to suit the function of that sound effect in the theatrical sense. Do sound effects mentioned in the script create a sense of time passing? Is there a grandfather clock that keeps ticking and ticking, escalating tension? And if there is mention of that, also think about what you can change for that clock. Can the ticking get faster and faster and faster? Can it get higher and higher in pitch? Or can it just suddenly dip down during a very important part of the script? Yeah. And then after looking at the script, I think about the big picture and I start pitching these ideas to directors and the creative team. And that's when the mood board, a sound palette comes in. And, like I said, it's similar to Pinterest, but for sound. And it serves to illustrate almost the framework of sounds, or the variety of sounds in which I want to operate in and create sound effects in. It could be Baroque even, or classical. And then creating different scene change effects or sound effects that fall within that parameters, and then sometimes create them out of those parameters. And that was also a very interesting thing to do. Cool. Now I'm going to mention some... Any questions? Not yet? Great. Oh, good. Talking ahead, paging ahead. Okay, cool. Now, in rehearsals, when we stage it, what else we need to look at is connectivity. How I mentioned themes earlier, but how do we connect scenes together? How much time do you need to connect scenes together, and whether we can draw on material that I previously heard in different earlier scenes to make it work. Doing more with less is always a good rule of thumb, I've found. Now we can talk about I think, resources that might be helpful for creating your own sound effects and your own scene change music. Cool. The first one that I'm going to talk about is I'm going to do some samples. I'm going to play some samples. So earlier, I'm hoping that you can hear this. So I'm going to play this to my speakers. And if you can't, just give me a shout, okay? So earlier I mentioned a show called Finishing the Picture, where we had a saxophone stand in for Marilyn Monroe. It's on Act 3, so here we go. I am going to play the backing track first. And you notice, first thing to talk about is the backing track. This is a backing track that underscores the whole Act 3, about 30 minutes. And it starts off with quite a steady, I think, BPM 100, and then by the 30th minute, it's sped up to 160 BPM, but it does that over a very gradual fade. And so I'm changing the element of tempo, making it more skitterish and making it more anxious, because the scene is getting more and more tense. Because it's over a course of 30 minutes, as an audience member, you don't really consciously notice it until the very end. You think, "Ooh, this is really, really stressful." So I'm going to play just that bit. Here we go. I hope you can hear this. And so that's about the first minute of it. I'm going to skip right ahead to about the 22nd second of this track. So tempo now is here, and about 22 seconds in, we are at here. Yeah, but that happens over about 20 or 30 minutes. This is a very gradual change. Now I'm gonna illustrate what I mean by sound as character. And again. And so a character called Edna is talking to Marilyn Monroe, who's going to be a saxophone. And when Edna talks, Marilyn responds. And this is Marilyn just getting up from bed, so she's a bit, tired, a bit sleepy. And then another character, let's say another character will come here. And now this is a character that Marilyn is not very particularly fond of, I think. And this is Marilyn reacting to the entrance of a character she's not particularly fond of. And so I've got about 60-something cues, all of a saxophone nature, which keeps it within the sound palette of cool jazz and jazz music. I took cool jazz saxophone licks and then reversed them, pitched them, and then tried to find excerpts that mimicked human speech and human reaction. Now, the second thing I'm going to show is a piece called The Invisibles, which was going to go on in March 2020 at the Vaults, but due to COVID, it didn't actually go on. I'm going to talk about using one single idea functionally. So we used the track Gasolina, the opening of Gasolina, to function as a phone ringing, and the actual drop of the song to symbolize the pimp talking to the two main characters. As the show is performed by two women, we also wanted the sound palette and the sound world to not have any male voices in it until it truly mattered. And because of the nature of the fact that the pimp calling them is an oppressive function in the piece, that's the only male voice we hear. Okay, so now we're going to do the phone ring. This is the first 4 bars of the song. Aha! Here we go. So that's the opening of Gasolina. And then the character answers the phone call. 3, 2, 1. And now we drop into the song. And all you need to do is just fade it down and have the character talk and respond. And that already serves a dramaturgical function, you see, by having one song. And then as the piece goes on and the pimp keeps calling, the song mutates and varies. And what I do is I do some audio manipulation techniques like equalizing, so that's above the bass up, take the treble down, add a bit of distortion to vary the same idea. Also, what else can we talk about in this piece? Quite a lot, actually. Also used we also incorporated the sort of the outside world set against the backdrop of protests against femicide in South America. So for that reason, we had a lot of recordings of protests live to stand in for actions like screaming, and to introduce the element of the outside world and protest into the piece. I'm going to find an example here. So I hope you can hear that. I'm going to turn it up a little bit. So yeah, that comes into a lot of scene changes as a device to draw relevance to the piece itself and where it sits. The last thing I'm going to show you is a piece called The Glass Will Shatter. And as the name suggests, it based a lot on glass. And so a lot of the sound effects and the scene change things in there, I created using a sound palette of glass, which includes rubbing on wine glass rims, which includes glass shattering. And so you can hear sounds and also, but also drawing that out in a very long way to escalate tension. So for example, we can start, that's how the show starts. It's rubbing a glass rim. And other sound effects include glass rattling. I'm just going to play the audio actually, because that seems to make a bit more sense. We've got different, glasscapes that come in, as well as, oh, I should prepare this a bit better. I'm so sorry, this is a bad example to prepare. Or glass rattles. And by just playing around with all the elements of sound that glass can offer. So that's another example to show. I'm going to spend the last 7 minutes here to talk about some resources that might be interesting to you to create your scene change music and to find sound effects from. So one thing to look into is it's called BandLab, BANDLAB, which I'll type into the chat at the moment. Now, BandLab. And that allows you, it's a browser, and basically it's called like GarageBand on the browser. And it lets you look from different music packs and music examples and create your own scene change music, and you can loop and unloop them and see, and go in different tempos and also vary it to suit your project, of course. Another thing that might be interesting is something called Lexus Audio Editor, which I have on my phone, and basically it is a piece of software that lets you, free software on Android and Apple phones, that allow you to record a sound around you and then use different audio effects on it to create something different. So for example, I had 3 claps here. Great, you can see it, fantastic. I'm gonna play it out louder, let's see if that works. So I record myself clapping 3 times, and after adding different audio effects here, you can have a look into what things, for example, that reverse does. I use a lot of these audio effects, including reverse, pitch changing, speed changing, equalizing, which is changing the frequencies that are expressed in the sound signal, reverb, echo, even vocoders, in a lot of my work, and that's just taking maybe one simple hand clap at the start of scene 1, and then doing various things to it so that it becomes something completely different by scene 10, for example. So Lexus Audio Editor, which I'll also type in the chat. Lexus Audio Editor. It's a wonderful piece of software that you can record sounds around you and then have a play with it. Audacity is also very useful, especially as it's available both on Apple and Windows operating systems. And then you can also look into, not only is there QLab on your Mac, but there's also something called the Go button on iPhones, unfortunately, only for iPhones. And that is sort of it's sort of like a mini QLab that is also quite fun to trigger shows and to look into the idea of queuing generally. In terms of free sound effects or websites to look into, which I will also paste, I have it all here. There we go. So these are things that may be interesting to use and for your project, especially creating soundscapes. I just commented, and they're all ranging from, you see that? There we go. Cool. So freesound.org, freemusicarchive.org, free sound effects, BBC sound effects. These are all things that you can use in your plays to create soundscapes. And then might be really fun is to put it into Audacity and then vary it across different audio effects, reverse like I just mentioned, and then seeing how that works across the 7 elements that I think about usually when I create sound and design, creating a sound design for a piece. And so again, just to reiterate, I think about the setting and location, so where and when it's set. I think about mood and emotion and how sound can underscore it. I think about amplification and sound source. Where does the sound come from? Is it a speaker on stage, speaker behind the audience? What does that say? Whose voice gets amplified more? I think about using diegetic sound versus non-diegetic sound and whose world are we in? I think about the sound palette, so the sound world that we create, the typical sounds and music that we as audience members hear, and then how do we react and understand and latch meaning to. I think about story and memory and adding a dimension of that onto a play, or what can you as a sound designer or a creative bring on top of something that already exists, whether that is, a memory, a music cue that represents memory of a character, or a sound cue that brings the outside world in, and many more techniques than that. And number 7, sound, a character. What can you stylize and what can you abstract from a script? And maybe there's something that sound can communicate and needs to. For example, the Marilyn Monroe show, for example, it's number one, it's probably quite difficult to cast Marilyn Monroe, but also it makes it more almost like relatable and human in a way, in a certain sense, to have sound substitute in the response. So yeah, that gives us about a minute and a half for any questions. Just feel free to pop any questions over, or you can definitely email me as well, which my website's www.nicolatchang.com, and my contact is on there. And if there's anything that in this chat that you'd like me to go over or talk again, or send you more resources, just do shout. It's been a pleasure, and thank you so much for having me and for your time this afternoon. And I hope it's not too cold, and hope you're staying warm and taking care and staying safe through these times. So I'll let it run on for a little bit more. Any questions? Otherwise, thank you for having me again. It's been a pleasure, and I hope this was insightful to a certain extent and useful to a certain extent as well. Cool. Thanks. No worries, Isaiah. All good. What's the nature of it? How often do you meet? All right, I've got a question here. What is the nature of your relationship with the director, and how often do you meet? No worries, Lauren. So, in my experience, usually I meet with them before the project, and that happens. I think directors want to meet sound designers they're pairing with, or they potentially think will be a good fit for their project. And we usually meet in a cafe and talk about the script. I get sent the script in advance, and what I do is I prep. I think about what in my own head. I think about the sounds and the music. I usually prepare a Spotify playlist and I meet the director ahead of the project, figure out whether we're a good fit, and we're a good fit. Then I think for the majority of the projects I've worked on, I it's a very good question actually. What's the nature of my relationship? I'll answer the second question first, and I think that will help me answer the first question. How often do I meet? I meet once or twice before the project actually starts. Oh, no worries, Simon. You can email me anytime. And then I think I meet during a 4 week rehearsal process. And maybe I might meet once during the first week to see how the first week rehearsals are going. I'll be there for the read through, and then during the read through, hearing the words out loud might give me other ideas or other sound ideas, and might play some music. The second week, maybe I meet them once again, and the third and fourth week is when I meet them a bit more often. I start bringing in preliminary sound ideas and also for the actors to react to in the room, because it's a bit, if actors go into a space during tech and have a new sound design around here, it's feels but like, to suddenly react to a lot of things in everybody's head, and I don't think that's very fair. And then on the fourth week, that's when I'm quite intensively in rehearsal, preparing a cue lab for the stage manager so that they can operate and have a chance, and because it's their rehearsal as well. The relationship with you, oh, that's a good question, Simon. So relationship with director is, I think, generally very quite responsive. If that answers the question, I think it's definitely working in theatre is it's a relationship of everybody offering ideas, offering time and offering ideas, and I think in my experience, I think I've been able to I get as much of these out of the director and out of the play as much as I'm willing to put in, and that ranges anywhere from research to preparing sound palettes to bring in to a lot of trial and errors. It's important to also find out how the director likes to communicate about theatrical ideas. Some directors are very visual, and I like to ask that actually in the first meeting. I go, oh, so do you consider yourself quite a visual director or quite an audio director, or do you? And so some, for example, if directors are quite visual, then they may not use the same terminology that I use for sound design. So they say, oh, I want to use a drone, I want to use this, and they may say, oh, so it doesn't sound big enough. And in their head, big is something that's visually arresting, but in my head, big means loud. So that's happened before. And so it's actually also really worth asking in terms of inspiration, how for this particular project, is director inspired by film, for example, or other theatre pieces, or audio plays, or even books, and that for me says something about how I think the whole project is put together, and so that's really helpful to finding common ground and being reactive and responsive is the relationship with my director. So thank you, Lauren, for that. Simon has asked, hi Nicola, what do you find is the rough proportion of silence and sound design? How do these proportions change? For example, a play, comedy, or thriller. So the question is proportion of silence across different genres of theatre or different forms of theatre, which is a really good question because I didn't actually talk about silence now. I think in my work as a designer, I tend to use silence quite, I think, the term I'm looking for is gesturally, I think. I try to prep the audience's ears to general sounds, and then when the sound disappears, then I think all the dialogue on stage, welcome, all good, all the dialogue on stage sounds louder because now there isn't anything in the background that you're used to. And so whether that is room tone, and then you can just take it out, it's kind of like an old trick in the book. And because there's nothing else now, a lot of the dialogue on stage sounds louder. So Simon has asked, how the proportion of silence change in a play, comedy, or thriller? And I must say, I've done more plays than I've done comedies or thrillers. So I don't think I can answer for the latter two genres. I definitely think it's a device. Silence as a device should be talked about and thought about actually quite ahead in advance, in the second, even in your overall design plan to the director, and saying, okay, well, I'm thinking of using these sound effects underscoring most of the scenes, and then so that we can enable silence. Because I think in sound design, silence operates against a lot of things that are already there, and therefore by itself is a device. And so it's something that you can prompt the director and say, okay, well, I'm thinking of using silence as a device to make certain things sound louder or to make certain things hit harder. And then that allows you and the director and a lot of the creative team to collaboratively think about which moments in the play are key to that and which moments are not so much. In a comedy, I actually say, I think timing. I would say this operation, the effect of silence in comedy almost is that 2 or 3 seconds between a line and a sound effect that comes in. And that, in comedy, timing is everything. And there are operators who will kind of, so they do it, and then there's sometimes you have to be like, just a little hair more, hair less. And I think the function of silence in comedy, therefore, is the anticipation of a reaction from the audience. And a thriller, I'm not so sure. I haven't done a lot. I haven't done a lot of thrillers on stage, so I can't answer too truly. I think it's also what you put. It's what you put before and after the silence in the thriller that makes it land. If that makes any sense, I hope that's useful. I'm afraid I don't have much experience with comedy and thriller, too much. But generally, it's silence operating as either space between something that's important and not important. Silence operating between two things that are very important, that space, as well as what comes before and after it, so the silence itself becomes something significant. So I hope that's useful, Simon. And I should have a think about that as well. That's a very good question. They're all great questions. Thank you. So yeah, we are about 7 minutes over. But if there are any other questions, my website's in the chat. And also, I feel free to just talk about sound design and how to get in, or if you're a musician and quite interested in theatre, I'd love to have a chat. And so thank you so much, everybody, for coming. Thank you for your time. Stay safe, take care, and all best. Bye.